The three little girls entered the sunlit restaurant holding hands, their matching yellow dresses wrinkled from the bus ride and their small faces pale with worry. Around them, crystal glasses shimmered beneath the chandeliers, waiters moved between tables with silver trays, and wealthy guests paused mid-conversation as the children crossed the polished marble floor alone. At the most private table by the tall windows sat Seraphina Vale, one of the country's youngest billionaires, waiting impatiently for a blind date she had already decided would be her last. She looked at the empty chair across from her, then at the triplets approaching with a folded piece of paper clutched between them. When they finally stopped beside her table, the eldest gathered enough courage to explain why they were there. Their father was sick, so they had come instead. In that moment, the entire restaurant seemed to fall silent, and Seraphina had no idea that what she did next would change four broken lives forever. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Eco-verse if you believe in kindness and second chances. Stories like this remind us that the smallest act of compassion can become the beginning of something extraordinary. Seraphina had spent most of her 36 years learning not to be surprised. She ran Vale Meridian, a global logistics company she had inherited after her father's sudden death and rebuilt after a devastating financial scandal nearly destroyed it. She negotiated with ministers, dismissed dishonest executives, survived hostile takeovers, and faced rooms filled with men who assumed her silence meant weakness. Very little unsettled her anymore. Yet the sight of three 7-year-old girls standing beside her table, staring at her with the same enormous hazel eyes, left her completely unprepared. The children introduced themselves as Maribel, Coralie, and Tamsin Mercer. Their father, Rowan, was the man Seraphina had been scheduled to meet. He had awakened that morning with a high fever and could barely stand, but the girls had overheard him leaving a message to cancel the date. Convinced that he was lonely and afraid he would lose his chance to meet someone kind, they had taken the invitation card from the kitchen counter, counted the coins in their shared savings jar, and ridden a bus across the city. The restaurant manager hurried toward them, clearly intending to remove the children before they disturbed the distinguished guests. Seraphina stopped him with one raised hand. She noticed that Coralie's sandal strap was held together with tape, that Maribel carried a worn backpack decorated with fading stars, and that little Tamsin's hair had been braided unevenly, as though her father's hands had trembled while preparing them that morning. These were not mischievous children playing a prank. They had crossed the city because they believed their father deserved not to be forgotten. Seraphina asked the waiter to bring 3 chairs, 3 glasses of juice, and whatever lunch the girls wanted. The manager hesitated, but one glance from her ended the discussion. Within minutes, the empty chair meant for Rowan had become part of a crowded table filled with crayons, bread rolls, spilled juice, and 3 nervous children slowly beginning to smile. The triplets told Seraphina about their father in the innocent, unfiltered way children reveal what adults try to hide. Rowan worked as a maintenance supervisor at a community art center, repairing broken pipes, painting classrooms, and keeping the aging building alive on a salary that barely covered their rent. Their mother had died from complications following a sudden illness when the girls were only 2. Since then, Rowan had raised them alone, learning to braid hair through online videos, sewing costumes for school plays by hand, and sleeping on the living room couch whenever one of them had nightmares. They explained that he had not been on a date in years. A teacher at their school had created his profile without telling him, hoping he might meet someone who could see beyond his worn clothes and exhausted eyes. Seraphina listened while the food before her grew cold. The story touched a place inside her that she had sealed away long ago. Seraphina's mother had left when she was 8, tired of her husband's long absences and relentless ambition. Seraphina had grown up in enormous houses filled with staff members but almost no warmth. Her father gave her everything except his time, and when he died, he left her an empire and a loneliness so carefully hidden that even her closest colleagues mistook it for independence. She had tried blind dates because her board members, friends, and publicist insisted she needed a life outside her company. Every meeting had ended the same way. Some men wanted access to her fortune. Others were intimidated by her authority. A few spoke more to her surname than to her. That afternoon, however, 3 children who owned almost nothing had come not to ask what she could give them, but to tell her why their father was worth knowing. Maribel finally unfolded the paper she had carried into the restaurant. It was a handwritten note Rowan had drafted but never sent. In it, he apologized for canceling and explained that fatherhood had taught him to keep promises, even when life made them difficult. He wrote that he understood if Seraphina preferred not to reschedule, but he wished her kindness and happiness. His handwriting became shaky near the bottom, where the fever had likely worsened. Seraphina read it twice. Then she asked the girls where they lived. Across the city, Rowan Mercer awoke on the couch of a cramped apartment to the sound of his phone vibrating beneath a blanket. Sunlight streamed through thin curtains, illuminating bowls of untouched cereal on the kitchen table. His fever blurred the room, but panic sharpened his senses when he realized the girls were gone. He found their piggy bank empty, the restaurant invitation missing, and a note written in green crayon promising they would be back after helping him. Rowan stumbled toward the door, barely able to remain upright. Before he reached it, someone knocked. When he opened the door, he found his daughters standing safely in the hallway, each carrying a paper bag filled with food. Behind them stood Seraphina Vale, still dressed in the elegant cream suit she had worn to the restaurant. A chauffeur waited near the elevator, and several neighbors peeked curiously from their doorways. Rowan's face drained of color. He apologized before she could speak, ashamed that his children had interrupted her afternoon and terrified that she might think him careless. But Seraphina saw something else. She saw a sick father who had dragged himself from bed because the thought of danger reaching his daughters mattered more than his own weakness. She saw clean laundry stacked neatly despite the peeling walls, handmade drawings covering the refrigerator, and 3 small coats patched with careful stitches. Nothing in the apartment was luxurious, yet everything bore evidence of love. Seraphina did not criticize him. She helped him back to the couch, arranged for a doctor to visit, and opened the bags of soup and bread she had purchased. Rowan tried to refuse her assistance, explaining that he was not looking for charity. She answered that accepting help while sick was not charity, it was common sense. The girls sat around him while the doctor examined his chest and diagnosed a severe respiratory infection that required medication and several days of rest. Rowan's greatest concern was not his health but missing work. The art center had already reduced staff, and another absence could cost him the position that kept a roof over his daughters' heads. Seraphina could have solved the problem with a phone call and a large check. Instead, she stayed. She learned that Rowan's pride did not come from arrogance but from years of being judged. After his wife died, people praised him for surviving while quietly assuming he would eventually fail. Employers treated his need to leave work for school emergencies as irresponsibility. Other parents excluded the girls because their second-hand clothes looked worn. Even the landlord reminded him every month that single fathers were considered risky tenants. Rowan had built his life around proving that his daughters were not burdens. He feared that accepting help from a billionaire would make him feel like the failure everyone expected him to become. Over the next week, Seraphina found reasons to return. At first, she brought groceries and medicine. Then she brought work documents, claiming the apartment was quieter than her office, though the triplets constantly interrupted her with drawings and questions. During the bright afternoons, she worked at the small kitchen table while Rowan recovered on the couch. She watched him help the girls with spelling even when coughing left him breathless. She saw how he divided one apple into 4 equal pieces without taking the largest portion for himself. She noticed that when Tamsin spilled paint on Seraphina's expensive handbag, Rowan did not shout. He calmly showed her how to clean it, then apologized with such sincerity that Seraphina found herself laughing for the first time in months. Rowan, in turn, began to see the woman behind the headlines. Seraphina arrived with security drivers and wore clothes worth more than his annual rent, yet she seemed strangely uncertain when the girls hugged her. She knew how to command thousands of employees but had no idea how to braid hair. She could calculate shipping losses across continents but burned grilled cheese on the first attempt. The girls delighted in teaching her ordinary things. They showed her how to build blanket forts, how to decorate pancakes with fruit faces, and how to identify clouds from the apartment rooftop during warm daylight. Each lesson loosened something inside her. Their growing closeness did not remain private for long. A photograph taken outside Rowan's building appeared online. Within hours, gossip sites described him as an opportunist targeting a lonely billionaire. Reporters gathered outside the arts center. Vale Meridian's board warned Seraphina that the relationship could damage investor confidence. One director suggested discreetly paying Rowan to disappear before the story became embarrassing. Seraphina dismissed the suggestion, but Rowan overheard enough to understand the pressure surrounding her. He had spent his life shielding his daughters from instability, and now strangers followed them near school. He decided distance was the only protection he could offer. When Seraphina arrived at the apartment one clear Saturday morning, she found the triplets unusually quiet and Rowan waiting by the window. He thanked her for everything she had done, then told her their lives belonged to different worlds. He explained that the girls were becoming attached, that the public attention frightened them, and that he could not let them build hopes around someone whose life might eventually demand she leave. His words sounded calm, but the grief in his expression betrayed him. Seraphina understood because abandonment had shaped her too. Yet instead of arguing, she quietly left. For several weeks, Rowan heard nothing from her. The reporters vanished, the school routine returned, and the apartment felt emptier than before. The girls stopped asking when Seraphina would visit, not because they had forgotten but because they saw how much the question hurt their father. Rowan returned to the arts center and buried himself in repairs. He tried to convince himself that he had protected everyone, but every time sunlight crossed the kitchen table, he remembered Seraphina working there while the girls colored beside her. Then, one afternoon, the director of the community arts center called an emergency meeting. The building's owner had decided to sell the property to a developer. Unless someone purchased it within 30 days, the center would close, dozens of employees would lose their jobs, and hundreds of neighborhood children would lose access to affordable music and art programs. Rowan felt the floor disappear beneath him. The center was more than employment. It was where his late wife had once taught dance classes, where the triplets attended after-school programs, and where families with very little money still found beauty. Rowan organized fundraisers, repaired the auditorium for a benefit concert, and worked until his hands cracked. The community rallied, but the amount they raised was nowhere near enough. On the day the final decision was expected, families gathered outside the center beneath the bright midday sky. Children held handmade signs. Teachers stood with instruments and paintbrushes. Rowan kept the triplets close, trying to prepare them for the loss. A line of black cars stopped along the curb. Seraphina stepped out, not dressed for a boardroom but in simple trousers and a blue blouse the girls had once said matched her eyes. She walked past the cameras and approached Rowan with several legal documents. She had purchased the building, but not in her own name. Ownership had been transferred to a non-profit trust managed jointly by teachers, neighborhood residents, and employees of the center. No developer could sell it, and no billionaire could use it as a publicity trophy. The building would belong to the community permanently. Rowan stared at her, overwhelmed. Seraphina explained that she had spent her life believing money could create security, yet the Mercer family had taught her that real security came from people who chose to stay. She had not returned to rescue him. She had returned because the center mattered, because the neighborhood mattered, and because loving someone meant protecting what they loved without taking control of it. Then the triplets broke free from Rowan's hands and ran to her. Maribel wrapped her arms around Seraphina's waist, Coralie clung to one side, and Tamsin reached for the other. This time, Seraphina did not freeze when they hugged her. She lowered herself to the pavement and held all three girls close while tears moved freely down her face. Rowan finally understood that he had mistaken fear for wisdom. He had pushed her away not because their worlds were too different, but because he was terrified of losing happiness after surviving so much grief. Seraphina had been afraid too, yet she had chosen courage. In front of the center, beneath the clear afternoon sun, Rowan asked whether she would consider beginning again, not as a billionaire meeting a struggling father, not as a rescuer entering a broken home, but as two imperfect people willing to build trust slowly. Seraphina accepted. Their life did not become effortless. Reporters still speculated. Board members still questioned her decisions. Rowan still worked long hours, and the triplets still argued over bathroom time, lost shoes, and whose turn it was to sit beside Seraphina at dinner. But the apartment eventually became a brighter house near the art center, chosen not for its size but for its garden and sunny kitchen. Seraphina reduced her travel schedule. Rowan joined the center's board while continuing maintenance work because he refused to abandon the job that had carried his family through its hardest years. 1 year after the triplets walked into the restaurant, Seraphina and Rowan returned to the same table by the windows. This time, there were 5 chairs. The girls wore matching lavender dresses and carried a small box containing a ring they had helped choose. Rowan proposed during lunch, his voice unsteady and his hands trembling. Seraphina looked at the 3 children who had entered her life because they refused to let their father miss a chance at happiness, and she understood that they had not merely attended his blind date. They had delivered a family to a woman who had stopped believing she could belong to one. The wedding took place during the day in the courtyard of the community art center. Sunlight filtered through flowering trees, children played music from the balcony, and photographs of Rowan's late wife were placed among the flowers so the triplets would know their first mother had not been erased. Seraphina promised not to replace anyone, but to love the family exactly as it had been formed, through grief, courage, mistakes, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ecoverse. Your support helps more stories of compassion, family, and hope reach people who may need a reminder that love can arrive in the most unexpected way. And before we end, please comment: kindness can change a life if you believe one sincere act of care can open the door to a completely new future. Years later, whenever anyone asked Seraphina how she met her husband, she never began with the restaurant, the blind date, or Rowan's illness. She began with 3 little girls in yellow dresses walking bravely across a marble floor. They had arrived carrying only bus coins, a crumpled invitation, and faith in their father. They thought they were saving his date. They never realized they were also saving a woman who had everything money could buy, yet had spent her entire life waiting for someone to choose her for something money could never provide. And that was how 3 children who came in their father's place gave a lonely billionaire the one fortune she had never known how to earn: a family that stayed.